You're going to have people in your life telling you to follow your passions. And I'm over here thinking, why? What if your passions are dumb? What if your passions are bad? Now, I don't want to sound mean. I'm not trying to. Now, of course, people are going to tell you this in school, and what they mean by that is choose a vocation you're not going to end up hating. I get that. But as a guiding principle in life, it is a pretty common thing for older people to say to younger people. Find your passions and follow them. And I would also like to challenge the idea that the passions within you are the most pure part about you. Of course, again, as a Christian, the Bible has clear instruction on this. We are special and valuable because we're made in the image of God, and His Spirit's imprint upon us, the influence of the Holy Spirit. These things would be superbly valuable and the purest things about our nature. So, but I don't think that your passions would be the purest part of you. And the reason I say that is because, in my understanding, passions are basically extreme versions of emotions. And I find it really perplexing that an older generation would tell a younger generation to just basically follow their whims or their desires, especially the strongest versions of them. Why would you do that? So I have some verses to share with you to sort of buttress my argument, but I think at this point you already understand where I'm going with this. Don't just blindly follow your whims. Don't just blindly follow your desires. Be wise in your life. Follow wisdom and not your passions. Now, before I get into these passages, again, I just want to give you a little synopsis of where I'm going. Imagine there's a Venn diagram of all the things you're passionate about at this moment. And there's another little circle here in this diagram of all the things that God is passionate about. Now, let's say you're a secularist and you don't care. At this point, you may lose interest, but if you're trying to follow God and be pious to honor Him as a follower of Christ, then you should really think hard about the things that overlap. What kinds of things are you at this point passionate about that God is also passionate about? But then a second layer of thinking would be this. What about all those things that God's passionate about that you're not? What would you do about those? And what about the things that you're passionate about that God disapproves of? These are all really important questions to consider. And I think at the end of the day, you should guide your life and the way you live your life based on the things God is passionate about. And you could say, well, but I'm not interested in those things. And my response to that is yes, but you can change. You can mature over time. You have so far. I don't know how old you are or where you live or anything about you, but on the other side of this camera, you know that when you were younger, you had less mature passions, less mature desires. And it's probably your hope that you grow over time. And so you can, as 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7 says, train yourself for godliness. Where's a good place to start? Find out what God cares about. A lot of your mentors in life have been telling you so far to find your passions, because I think it's their assumption that you would be finding the purest part of you and being true to yourself as like a highest virtue. But I would like to challenge that idea and say, don't be naive. The inside of a human person can be beautiful, but it also cannot be. It can be ugly and terrible. And you know that. People have lied to you or lied about you. People have maybe stolen from you or insulted you, or worse. You know what a human is capable of doing. And so you also know how foolish it is to tell somebody to just merely follow their passions. Instead, you should follow the wisdom from God. So I do have some verses for you. 2 Timothy chapter 3. Starting in verse 2, Paul warns Timothy that people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving God, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Now, of course, you should have compassion on somebody in those categories. You don't really know what led to the place in life. Let's say someone is living in without self-control and they're brutal and they don't love good. You know, just because you don't trust them, and by the way, you shouldn't, doesn't mean you shouldn't have compassion on them. So you can have compassion on them, but it would be wrong of you to encourage them to indulge in their sinful desires. So you can have compassion while not trusting somebody and while encouraging them, hey, instead of following your passions in life, why don't you follow wisdom? I have another passage for you here. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16 says, "For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." So again, if you're secular, you may not have interest in the source behind what I'm saying, but you at least understand that it's probably right that you should follow wisdom instead of emotions. But as a Christian, I believe that God's wisdom is really teaching us that just the mere passions of your flesh, the mere passions of who you are in this worldly life, these passions are not necessarily from God. Now, you may have a passion for worship, and I do think that comes from God. You may have a great desire for fellowship and community, and I do think these things come from God. But this passage says, all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life. Of course, we're not considering, desire to worship and be in the presence of the Lord and fellowship and stuff like that. Justice, mercy, these things. What this is talking about is, selfish ambition, prideful desires, desires of the flesh, meaning of this world, or even worse, not things that come from God or reflect His nature. And we see something like that in Romans chapter 8. For those who live according to the flesh, again, there's that same word, flesh, set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. And I think you understand the contrast here. Again, in Romans chapter 12 now, you see in verse 2, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." So, that doesn't mean that if you're really excited about something, that you should say, "Oh, wait, no, God doesn't want me to be happy, I shouldn't do it." That's also silly. So wisdom is known by all of its fruit. You should know that God is perfectly fine with you following your dreams of a career, choosing a spouse, favorite colors, all these things. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying don't blindly follow your desires, whatever they are, merely because all the adults in your life have told you that since you were young. What I'm saying is have wisdom. So sure, there's going to be times where the things that you're really passionate about, God also cares about those things. But there's, I shook the camera, but there's also going to be times where you're really passionate about something, but your conscience is pricked and you know deep down that God actually doesn't approve of it. What I'm saying is follow wisdom and not just your momentary desires. And you could probably, test over the last 5 years. Your desires have changed anyway, but the things that are noble and good and pure don't change. So I encourage you, seek God's wisdom and follow that. Thanks for watching.